Hey everybody, Dr. Robin here. Good to see you all again. I have brought back our guest from last week, Professor Daina Castro. You may have noticed in the conversation about emotions, she kind of naturally rolled into a little bit about boundaries. And I thought, well, that's kind of serendipitous. So I asked her to come back since that was our next topic. So we're just going to pick up where we left off and continue that conversation into boundaries. Um, Something I think is important to define, to talk about why it's hard to set boundaries, that there are a lot of different types of boundaries, what we may feel when a boundary's been crossed, and also what it may feel like to work on setting them and practice that and different ways to practice. So we have a whole lot to talk about today. So Professor Daina, thank you for coming back to see us again. Glad to have you.
Glad to be here. Hi, everyone. Excited to talk about another topic that I think a lot of us are, at least I wasn't really taught how to navigate the situation. It was definitely difficult for me to set my own boundaries as I got older. So I do think it's another really important conversation for us to have. So I'm excited to talk about it today.
Yeah, me too. So maybe we should start off with a definition. Like, what are we talking about when we say boundaries? I think it's sort of an abstract idea. It's funny, I even told you right before we started talking, I thought, I'm going to ask you to define it because I think like I know what they are, but I don't know if I could put it into words. So how would you define boundaries?
So if I was talking to somebody that had never heard what a boundary was, I would ask you all to kind of imagine this fence that you have, this imaginary fence. And in this, or for this fence, if somebody were to cross that line, we are saying that these are the things that I am comfortable with. If someone were to cross that line, you are saying, this is what I'm going to do. It's really important to note that a boundary does not control somebody else's behavior. It is saying what we will do. So there are consequences to boundaries. So, an example of that, we can say, if I am not comfortable with you yelling at me when we are in a discussion, so I'm going to step away from the situation.
That's a good example. And it's interesting as you said that, the first place my mind went when you said what we're comfortable with and what we'll do, I thought, I think a lot of us grow up not even quite sure what we are and aren't comfortable with or what our options are for what to do in response when we realize we're not comfortable with something. I think that, and tell me if this resonates for you. I feel like for some of us, something just seems normal if we grew up around it, or maybe we're around it a lot in our early adulthood. And it may take a while to go, oh, actually, I don't think I like this, or I think I might want to operate a little differently, but that might be a slow realization for some of us.
Definitely. I grew up in a collectivist culture. I am Nicaragüense and Guatemalteca, so my family's from Nicaragua and also Guatemala. I grew up in a primarily Nicaraguan home. And so, because of my culture, we are working from a collectivist space. So, what that means is everything is in the greater good of the group, of the family unit. And so, when I was being raised, and there were maybe some things that I didn't necessarily agree with or align with myself, there felt like there weren't things I could talk about because it wasn't in the greater good of the family unit. It was almost as, and this is a word I heard a lot when I was growing up, was selfish to talk about what I felt comfortable and uncomfortable with. And so with that growing up, it was really just learning about what then my values were, what I aligned with, what I really wanted to believe in, and started questioning that to see what is it that I aligned with and what was it that my family aligned with.
Thank you for naming that. I think the culture part of that is an important consideration for all of us. And when you name collectivism, and we might circle back to this, it's probably important for us to name that collectivism is also beautiful in a lot of ways. A lot of resources come from coming from a family with a strong identity where people show up to support each other. So both individualism and collectivism sort of have their own pros and cons as we kind of work out how much we're bringing both of those into our lives and how to benefit from both. But I agree that culture is one piece of where we may be socialized into certain values or ways of operating. if I think about myself, I think gender was very strong, that the women in my household took care of the emotional needs, as well as sometimes also, the physical needs like cooking or whatever that might be for the men. And a lot of times it was in a very implicit way. Like you could just see if he was stressed out or he needed something, and you just became very attuned to that. And I grew up learning how to be attuned to the needs of the people around me. Or also, if it was something like my parents fighting, I grew up learning how to be very attuned to what was happening in the household and shift my own energy to what was happening around me. And again, to like the pros and cons, I think I grew up with a lot of strengths because I'm so socially attuned. Is probably part of why I do what I do for a living today. And yet, I'm also learning that sometimes I'm putting too much work into being attuned to other people and figuring out what their needs are. Um, I think also maybe roles we're in, like from our like a or birth order type thing. I think I'm also the eldest. I was the eldest female with two younger brothers, so taking care of them a lot, I think, translates to taking care of other people in my adulthood. I don't know if you see patterns like that too with things like roles and family and
Definitely, when I think about myself, I'm the youngest, but I was parentified when I was younger. So what that meant is I had to have a lot of responsibilities when I was a child, more than my eldest sister had. And also that was just our personalities. I was always the mellow, the calm child. My sister was a little bit more rebellious. And so what that looked like in the role that I played in the family was that I was the peacemaker, but I was also the responsible one. And so like you were saying, to be in tune with people's emotions, that role made me be in tune with how people were acting. If I were to share something, I'd be kind of a little bit more watchful to see if they had a reaction to something, which I agree is probably why I'm in the line of work that I am in now of therapy, of being in tune with people's emotions and being able to read that a little bit more. I think I'm a little bit more sensitive to that than other people. But yeah, definitely being in that role that I had in my family, it really taught me to what I could and couldn't share so that I would be mindful of everybody else's emotions.
yeah, and as I think about it, you and I are comparing it or connecting it to our professions today. That's probably true for a lot of people in this class. A lot of our folks are psychology majors. A lot of our folks are in other majors that are going to relate to helping people like nursing, child development, whatever that might be. So a lot of us, I think, in this class are going into the helping professions. So we may have folks in here with a similar experience where they're very drawn to helping others, and that's their strength, and it's beautiful. And in the process, sometimes what we can neglect is ourselves and our own needs, which is probably a good segue into like why it's hard. And I want to talk with you too about how to recognize that something is a little off there. But maybe if we stay in this vein for a minute, like why is it maybe particularly hard for a lot of us who are good at caring for others?
I think that's why it is hard, Robin, because we are trying to be mindful of people's emotions, right? So if we are telling someone something that we're uncomfortable with, not only are we saying we're uncomfortable, but that might make someone else uncomfortable too. A lot of us are hesitant to put people in that space, right? I don't want someone to be angry with me. I don't want someone to be hurt at something that I've said. And so as a result of that, then we just don't share how we feel.
Yeah, I would agree. I have very high empathy. So that means I'm already feeling the way that other person might feel if I say this to them. Or if I do and they seem a little uncomfortable or a little grumpy about it, there's also a guilt that will hit me like, oh, maybe I wasn't a nice person. And I'm carrying around that desire to be a nice, caring person all the time.
Yeah, I think a lot of us do care how we are portrayed. And, of course, we all want to be perceived as nice and friendly and all the wonderful words that you want to say that you are. And that does scare us, right? If I share something, then I might be the bad person in the situation, and nobody ever wants to be the bad person.
Yeah, not just perception of others, but even how we might feel internally. Um, Let me go back a step though, because something you actually talked a bit about in our last conversation and was why I wanted to bring you back was you were talking a bit about how you recognize when a boundary's been crossed. When something, you mentioned the fence a few minutes ago, like how do I know when something maybe went over that fence for me, wherever my fence is, which I know is maybe different than where someone else puts their fence up.
I think that's a good point. I will start off there. Everybody has a different fence, right? Just like we all carry emotions differently, like we talked about last week, everybody's going to have different boundaries because we all have different experiences. So that's something to remember. Also, the way that we react is going to be different just because of the way that we carry emotions in our bodies or the way that we think about things. I like to think about my fences as being electrical fences because I feel hot when I feel like a boundary is crossed. I immediately feel like my body, like I've been in the sun for like 10 minutes and it's blaring and my body just feels really hot. And I also feel like, we use this expression a lot, right? There's something in my stomach. I feel like something just dropped. And that's when I feel like, oh, okay, I don't feel comfortable in this situation. Do you want to share how you feel when a boundary has been crossed?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about as you say that. The electric fence is interesting because I think for me it's like a yuck feeling.
Mhm.
Like maybe I'm talking to a friend and they ask me to do something and I know I don't quite want to do that or I don't quite want to get involved in this conversation or go to this particular event and I say yes and I'll kind of feel a little ugh, almost like nausea, interesting, like almost just a little sick to my stomach. And I used to ignore that. And now I go, oh, that's interesting. There's a little bit of that yuck feeling. And then that's where I learned to go, oh, maybe because I don't actually want to do this, or this thing is actually going to drain me, or whatever that is. Which is interesting too. A second ago, you were saying one reason we all have different fences because we've all had different experiences. And I was thinking we all also have different needs and different limits. Everybody's got their own personality. So something you may be very comfortable doing, I'm not, or vice versa. And that's okay. Um, which maybe we should actually talk about types of boundaries too, because then we can really bring this to life with very specific examples. We may be able to share some of our own and some hypothetical examples. Because I know that boundaries are not one thing. There are very different kinds of boundaries.
Yeah, it doesn't just mean I'm not comfortable with the tone of voice that someone's using. It could be a lot of different things. We can have physical boundaries. So we can just say like hugging. Some people are not comfortable with that. That was something I had to get used to, but also because of the family that I was in, we didn't hug growing up. We also have emotional boundaries. So I'll use an example in my personal life because I am a therapist. An emotional boundary that I have with friends is I can hear you and talk about your feelings, but I can't be your therapist. It can't hit this line where I feel like I'm doing my daily work. And then we also have time boundaries. And I know that's something that you and I were touching on earlier. If you want to, just talk a little bit how that looks like for you.
Yeah, time for me, and I should share too, like I have a personal physical limitation that because of some health issues, I sleep more than other people and I struggle more with energy than other people. And I've had to learn that I can't show up for as many events as maybe some other people do, and that it's okay to say no. I have also learned about myself that I can get overstimulated by too much noise or social events where there are lots of people and lots of energy happening. And I used to feel like I had to show up for every party or every loud dinner or whatever it might be. Like I was a bad friend or, bad person for not showing. And I've learned that it's okay to say, I might have a rough time there because that event might be a lot for me. So I might not make it to that. I'd love to do this other thing for you. I'd love if we could go out to dinner one-on-one at a quiet restaurant some other time. I've learned that it's okay to say, I'm a little tired this week and I want to make sure that I get enough sleep. And that doesn't mean I don't care about that person.
Yeah, I think it's really important to, just recognize that they can mean so many different things. Saying no can also be a boundary that we have for ourselves. That's also with boundaries, right? We can have personal boundaries for ourselves. So it sounds like some of the things you mentioned are things that you are saying, I'm okay and not okay with these certain things. I
Yeah. Well, it's like I appreciate being invited, but if I felt pressured to be there, I would start to feel a little bit of the yuck because I also have to take care of my physical needs at times. Um, I'm going back to what you said about emotional ones too, because I think that tends to be my biggest one. And like, I'll share with you, I'm newly caring for my aging father this past year. You and I have talked about that a little bit before. And one of the biggest pieces of the journey for me has been that sometimes he's not happy about that, about something, whatever it might be, his his cable is working a little slow today, or the line was too long at CVS, or he has a headache, whatever it might be. It might be something that I can't fix for him. I don't have any control over that. He's also not able to fix that for himself. It's just a thing that's kind of unfortunate. But at first, I felt so bad anytime there was anything that he was not happy about, wishing there was a way that I could make that better for him, or looking for a way to compensate for that for him, and realizing that it's okay if he's not in a great mood right now. And I can say, is there anything I can do to support you right now? And a lot of times he's going to say, no, it just, I just wish these lines went faster. I'm going to be like, yeah, you're right. I do too. But then I can say, it's okay that he's in a bad mood.
It kind of takes us back to what we focused on last week, right? Where feelings end. And, our families are entitled to be frustrated. Just like we said, we're entitled, right? And valid for us to feel those things. So are they. And it's a reminder that we don't always have to be the fixers, which I think it kind of goes back into the roles that some of us may have. That might be why some of us want to enter into the profession, right? But I'd also say sometimes some of us are even fixers in our relationships or in our friendships, or roles doesn't just have to mean how you show up in your family. It can mean in any capacity that you find yourself in any space, right? And I think it's a reminder just for everybody that just like we don't have to change the way that we feel, just feel that. We don't have to do that for other people too. It's okay for them to be angry and frustrated and sad and whatever else pops up for them.
Yeah, that's a perfect connection to last week. Just like we want to embrace the whole range of human emotions for ourselves, the people around us get to have the whole range of human emotions. Um, I think too about dynamics between multiple people sometimes. Like sometimes if other friends or people in the family are maybe fighting with each other and we're getting pulled into that to take sides, or just getting pulled into a lot of the gossip, that sometimes we are interested, and then sometimes we might realize like, gosh, this is taking a lot out of me, and it's okay to say, I'm going to let you two talk to each other.
I think it goes back to then tying perfectly, right? Of how we feel and acknowledging those feelings and hearing those feelings and taking care of them. There are some times where, let's say my sister and my mom are in an argument and I can totally hear them. I'm also in a similar situation where my grandfather is struggling with some health issues, and that brings up a lot for my mom. And so there are some days where I can hear her out and I can provide support. And there's some other days where maybe I had a heavy session that day, or the class or the topic in class was particularly also heavy that week too. And I can say, I want to be there, but I can't be there right now. It doesn't mean that I won't ever be there, but I'm acknowledging and holding that space for myself as well. I also probably would not be the best help at that time either if I'm doing something in a space where I am not capable of doing it.
Yeah, I think about what you just said too speaks to the fact that when we draw a boundary, we can do it in a way that still expresses that we care about the person around us. And I think sometimes we confuse it with rejection in some way. It says, I care about you and I need this other thing for myself right now, or I'm not in the best place for that. Which I think another thing for us to think about is ways to practice. And we'll have some worksheets for that for the class too, that might fold into some of our activities this week. But I'll ask you, like, what are some ways that you practice boundaries in little or big ways?
I think number one, I just like to communicate that with someone, letting them know that how I felt about something. So I could share. I had a situation with a friend that I kind of felt like he was crossing from a space where an emotional boundary was being crossed, and it felt like it wasn't just support anymore. It felt a little bit more than that. And I shared how I felt and I shared how it made me feel. And I also shared what I would need to do in that situation because, again, a boundary is not to control everybody else, but it's saying, what am I going to do in this situation? And so we talked about it. I did have to step back from that situation. That doesn't happen every time a boundary is crossed. I do want to say that. We don't always step back. It's just you acknowledging what you need to do. And for me at that time, in the moment that I was at in my life, that's what I felt that I needed to do. And after we talked about it and had a, really, I thought it was a really beautiful conversation to talk about how we both felt about things.
Yeah, when you mentioned that won't always happen, like the stepping back, it makes me think about what could happen after a boundary is drawn, could go any direction. it could be a beautiful conversation. Sometimes we realize I was dreading that conversation, and that was actually a beautiful conversation we just had. It could be neutral. It could be me saying, you know what, I don't think I can do that right now. Let's think about something else. And they, oh, okay. And it was just kind of a non-issue. It could also be negative, right? The other person could be upset that we didn't meet their needs or do what they expected of us at that time. And that's okay too. It's unpleasant, right? I'm going to feel a little, oh, darn, that went poorly or not the way I hoped. But that doesn't mean I was unsuccessful about drawing my boundary. I was reading a book about this last year, and that was one of the biggest points that I had to learn, that you will feel a little uncomfortable sometimes when you're practicing boundaries. And I'm going to take this all the way back for our students to, we've heard people mention muscle in here back, like when Alvarez mentioned muscles for your mindfulness, like you're developing muscles for boundaries, and it hurts when you work out new muscles. It hurts when they're building and you're kind of like, oh, dang, I'm sore from that. You know, so I will feel a little uneasy when I say, I don't think I can do that right now, or however I draw that boundary, or I'm not comfortable with this, or I need, I need to go create more of that for myself. Um, it will feel a little uneasy, and they could respond in a positive way, a neutral way, or a negative way. None of those mean anything about my choice to draw that boundary.
Right. I think the biggest thing to remember is that you are acknowledging your feelings and you are creating kind of this safe space around your fence, your house, right? We talked about the emotions being this house that you are all in. That's really what you're doing when you're acknowledging this boundary. You want to make sure that this house feels safe. So you can keep having that party that we talked about last week. And sometimes some people may not want to, accept that. That's okay. Not everybody's always going to respond in the way that we want to. But what you need to ask yourself is, what do I want to do then in that situation?
And when we mention someone not responding the way we hoped, I think that also speaks back to the community part. Who are the people in my community? We talked about this in the imposter syndrome conversation with Tamara. Like, who are the people who lift me up? Who are the people who are there for me? So if something was a difficult conversation, I have to know I have other people in my community who are there to support me, because I'm growing as I keep having these conversations. So who are the friends who like to witness my growth and be there on that journey with me?
I think that's a beautiful thought to have. I have had to learn in my boundary setting that there are people that I would love to have in my circle, but they are just not able to give me what it is that I need, right? That's why we all have different boundaries. And so what I've been able to accept is that that is the way that this individual is. I understand what my needs are. I'm not going to change them, but I will just, look for them and people that are able to provide that for me.
Yeah. As we get closer to wrapping up our time, I'm curious, are you thinking of anything that we haven't really hit on in this conversation about boundaries?
I do want to take us back because I think you put a pin in it about culture because I think it's so significant and important. And I, love talking about it in my classes and with my clients. And you made a really amazing point as while some of us may talk about the way that we set boundaries, it may be difficult because of our culture. There's also a lot of beauty. And so while there may be something that made it a little bit difficult for me growing up, it's something that I pride myself in a lot and I find a lot of comfort in my culture. And I think it goes back to the point that I said before of I've accepted that individuals in my family because of the culture that they come from. And culture can also just mean our household. It can mean your community. It doesn't just mean ethnicity. It means a lot of other things. And so because of our household culture, there was just things that we were not able to do or they were able to provide. But there were lots of other amazing things that they were also able to teach me and comfort me and still do things for me this day. It just looks a little bit differently than maybe what I had wanted when I was younger.
Yeah, that's a beautiful point to go back to. And as we're close to wrapping up, I'll ask you, when you think about this topic, what would you wish for our students?
It's a great question. I would, first of all, ask you all to take note of what it is that you are comfortable and not comfortable with. That's going to look differently than your peers. So someone in a discussion board might say one thing and you might say, that might not bother me. That's okay. that's okay that we all have different things that feel differently for all of us. And then I'd ask yourself too, is there may be something that you have wanted to say with somebody but you've been hesitant. So it's just really acknowledging those things and holding space for yourself and maybe wanting to set that boundary with somebody.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a great note for us to end on. I think a last thing I'll throw out there too, I think a journey for a lot of us is knowing that we deserve to take care of ourselves in whatever capacity that is, that we're worthy of it. So I want that for you all as well. And we'll follow up with some additional discussion and exercises in here. So looking forward to being in community with you all on the discussion board next week. Thank you to Professor Dana Castro for a double appearance. We appreciate you. Everybody, have a wonderful week.